Hey, what's up? It's Tuesday. Yeah, we're on schedule. So, if you're wondering which side I'm on, 21 Gogeta and Broly, that's me. Let's answer some fucking questions, dude. So first up, doing shipping labels and saw someone's last name was Reinfeld. So which Overwatch characters would portray who in Seinfeld? So we got a couple gimmies here, right? First off, Jerry, that's Soldier 76. Newman, Jerry's nemesis. That's gotta be Reaper. Easy. The cashier lady in the cafe, that's Bob. What is there another gimme in there? Elaine is either Mercy or Ash. I could go either way on that. So the two big questions. Who's George Costanza and who's Kramer? Now, the obvious answer for Kramer would be Junkrat, but there's a problem. I think Kramer might be too lucid to be Junkrat, so perhaps not. Maybe, who would be Kramer? This is the big one. George is also kind of difficult, though my initial gut reaction is actually Torbjorn. Yeah, Torbjorn might be the best one. Yeah, that goes well with Soldier being Jerry. Yeah. So who's Kramer, though? Maybe Torbjorn could be Kramer, too. We could just put him in a different hat. Scenes where Kramer and George are on screen at the same time are gonna be a little bit awkward, but maybe we could just have him be both of them. I guess we're gonna have to go with Junkrat just because I can't think of anyone better to be Kramer. But know that I do pick Junkrat as Kramer on Suffrage. But I think, you know, the others are all pretty obvious, to be honest. Is there anybody else that really shows up a lot? Not that I can think of offhand, but it has admittedly been a while since I watched Seinfeld. Oh, the Soup Nazi! Oh, that's a very important question. Who's the Soup Nazi? Probably Symmetra. Yeah, Symmetra's the Soup Nazi. Alright, so now, moving on. Tell us the story about Good Guy Braum. There's really not much story to tell here. It's two posts I made about 7,000 years ago, which were... Basically, there's this old meme that was never especially popular. It was called Calming Manatee, which was the picture of the manatee with various, treat yourself better slogans on them. And I read one and I was like, that sounds like Braum from League of Legends. So I made a bunch of images that were Braum splash art with similar quotes on them. And those to date are probably the most popular things I've ever posted on the internet. But I don't have the posts anymore because they were on Tumblr and I don't use that website anymore. That's the whole story. How big of a mouse pad should I have as a hit scan DPS? I have 11.3 inch versus 11.39 inch. Dog, let me show you where my mouse mat's at. This is it. We got from, we got from here to here. Literally a hand length. You'll be fine. You got a way bigger one than mine. Mine could have more space if I just, moved some of this trash out of the way. But that's not me. It's a question that's extremely permeable to who you are. So, I mean, does it feel big enough? If it feels big enough, it's probably big enough. If you're constantly, bashing your hand into shit, then maybe it's not big enough. You know, it's a very personal question. Next up, what do you consider a main tank? I always thought Winston was a main tank, but I've never encountered any other answer than Reinhardt from people in my teams. Yeah, so the problem is that Reinhardt skews people's expectation of what a main tank is, because he is the main tank. If you ask anybody who the tank in Overwatch is, or the main tank, you have a good chance of them answering Reinhardt. So I think that that's the issue. So yeah, Winston is a main tank, by the way. What constitutes a main tank for me is how much... It's a very nebulous way I'm going to describe it, I admit. But it's by how much presence they have, right? Because the distinction between main tank and off tank is that main tank captures space and off tank secures space. This is why Zarya is like the off tank example. She is good at securing space, but she is very bad at taking space herself, because she has no way to cover her team while advancing, essentially. The distinction mostly comes that, like, the main tank is walking forward, dealing with the the enemy team, broadly speaking, and then the off tank is securing everything behind the main tank. You don't want Reinhardt to have to come back and deal with the Genji that's trying to kill the backline, so Zarya deals with that instead, right? This is like the distinction, at least if she isn't doing something more pressing on the front line, I guess. You know, all questions are like, is this, but also this. Anyway, so I know, like, how much presence someone has is kind of nebulous, but, like, Reinhardt's the obvious one because he have big shield, cover big area, he'd do big damage, very scary to stand next to Reinhardt. Reinhardt hit me and he'd do big damage, not very nice. If it close to 100 damage. That probably half of my health, or that's like pretty close to half of my health, maybe more than half of my health, depending on who I am. Very scary, very intimidating, big scary ultimate, very spooky. So Rein's the main example, but then other examples are Orisa, who people have argued is a better main tank than Reinhardt at multiple points in time, but only the kind of smelly person that frequents Reddit. Toes was a main tank for a little bit, then he wasn't anymore. He's not anymore. Toes is not a main tank anymore. My son had a lot of trouble with that jump. It probably sounded terrible. You're not even that old, you lazy bum. Anyway. So Rein, Orisa, main tank. Winston also main tank. Hammond also main tank. And those are the only ones I'm really willing to categorize as main tank anymore. The thing is that people don't think of Winston and Hammond as main tanks because they don't have a shield. Well, Winston has a shield, but you know what I mean, right? He doesn't have a Reinhardt or an Orisa shield. So people don't like to include Winston and Hammond in this list, but they are absolutely main tanks because the amount of pressure they exert is definitely on the level of a main tank. They just don't do it by having a shield and pushing W. They do it by disruption, because they're disruption tanks. Hammond goes in, harasses a bunch of people. Hammond has definitely attracted the aggro of most of the team. Everybody on the enemy team is looking at Hammond right now while he's doing shit. And that gives your team time to move up because they're shooting at the Hammond rather than everyone else, so you walk up. Same deal with Winston. Ideally, they're being assisted by another dive tank, so Winston and Hammond, Winston and D.Va, Hammond and D.Va. Though not necessarily. For example, Hammond and Toes is pretty popular. They don't obviously synergize, but Toes is still able to assist Hammond to a degree while also protecting his team because he is almost a main tank. He is only just barely not a main tank. But yeah, that's like what a main tank is. It's how, like, they have to exert a certain amount of pressure on the enemy team at large to be a main tank. So Winston definitely does, but People have never actually believed that Winston is a main tank since the game came out, despite him always being a main tank. So, there you go. Next up, does your actual human son have any preferences on where he'll accept Nate? The man scritches, like the back of the ear, under the chin, etc. His whole, like, lower half. This is why sometimes when he comes on camera, he, like, lays down and does the thing where he, like, fully twists his body upwards, because that's him attracting my attention to the area in which he would like to be touched now. He also, what are you looking at? I just looked over at him, he's just staring straight at me, he knows I'm talking about him. He also is just a fan of the general head area. Sometimes he will be here, laying on my one arm, as he does, and I will be petting him. I will take the hand away, or attempt to use the mouse, and his arm will come out and, like, lock on my elbow to pull me back. So, the whole lower area and the general head area. Next up. Why is boosting seen as a horrible thing, but smurfing is completely acceptable? So first off, I disagree that people view smurfing as being completely acceptable. Now, it is true that smurfing is seen as more acceptable than boosting, but I dispute that smurfing is seen as completely acceptable, given people complain about smurfs constantly. Anyway. So, the reason that boosting is worse is that it is smurfing with an extra step on top of it. Because if you're boosting someone, you necessarily have to have smurfed to have done this, because you were playing on a lower level account than your own. So you have smurfed already. But then, not only have you smurfed, you are now also giving that account back to somebody that does not deserve to be in the place that they are now in. So it is smurfing with an extra element on top of it, which is why boosting is seen as horrible. It's both things. It necessarily can't be better than smurfing because it's smurfing with an extra step on it. So it can only be worse than smurfing by virtue of that alone. But also smurfing is not really seen as acceptable. People just still do it anyway, for a whole magnitude of reasons. I, for one, also smurf, but that's because all of my friends are dramatically lower rank than me. So when I play with my, 4 friends that play Overwatch, I also have to be playing on a lower level account to play with them. But I'm also not good enough to boost them all up by playing with them all at the same time. So it doesn't really equate to being smurfing. We kind of hover around the same area anyway, because I'm playing with a large collection of my friends who are all roughly the same skill. That's me justifying my actions, but at the end of the day, it's still smurfing. It's just, I like to think I have a better excuse than most people. So there you go. Next up. Does Bastion require skill? Of course he does. We all like to joke about Bastion being completely free of skill, but in reality, there is no hero that actually plays themselves. But what skill does Bastion take, I hear you ask? Whenever I see someone playing Bastion, all they do is sit in one spot, usually on Junkertown on the payload, and they hold their mouse in my general direction, and I die, because my team are bad. Definitely. Yeah, sure, okay. The thing is that, sure, if the other team doesn't play around Bastion, Bastion just ends up steamrolling the whole team. We all know this. The thing is that, sure, if the enemy team doesn't play around Bastion, Bastion owns them. You can say that about a multitude of heroes. You can say that about Pharah, but I don't really see many people categorizing Pharah as being an autoplay hero. Some people do, but I don't really see that as a broad opinion. Even though Pharah, if nobody's playing around Pharah, is equally as dominating as Bastion. Like, it's exactly the same thing, especially if she's got a Mercy with her, right? Like, an uncontested Pharah is absolutely dominating. The distinction is just that, like, we just view Bastion as being inherently less skillful because he doesn't have to, like, fly and his aim requirement is lower than Fighterz is. But, like, all heroes, if they're not played around, are equally dominating. This doesn't make Bastion require 0 skill inherently, because if that's true, that the requirement is just they dominate if they're not played around, we need to include many heroes as being no-skill heroes. Which some people do. But, you know how people are. Anyway, so what skill does Bastion take? Bastion actually requires, like, 2 skills. 3, though I understand why you'd want to debate me on this one, which is that I do think Bastion has an aim requirement. Obviously, it's not as high as a fucking hit scan DPS generally is gonna be. His aim requirement is not as high as McCree's, Ash's, or Widow's, right? It's about on par with Soldier, I'd say. Maybe a little lower than Soldier. But it's in that general ballpark area. But I can understand why you'd dispute me on that one. He definitely doesn't have a huge aim requirement, but it's there. Like, people like to include aim as one of Orissa's lists of skills, even though she has an extremely similar weapon to Bastion. Obviously less damage, but, like, if we're going to include Orissa's having an aim requirement, why are we not including Bastion when they have very similar styles of weapon? Anyway, so the 2 main skills that Bastion has, though, the big one is positioning, because if Bastion's positioned badly, look, don't even tell me that Bastion doesn't have a positioning requirement, which someone might be tempted to do. I could see having this argument. Don't argue with me on this. Bastion has a fucking positioning requirement. If you need evidence of this, how many times have you played with a Bastion on your team that before the round started, you went, why the fuck is the dude sitting over there? So obviously there's a positioning requirement, or you wouldn't have that reaction when you see a Bastion on your team. But I could see somebody trying to dispute that Bastion doesn't even require positioning because people just cheese grater themselves into him. There's a positioning requirement. And you also, carrying on for that, to be fair, this is like a component of positioning, but I'm going to distinguish it here, which is you need to be able to read how the fight is going, because you need to know when you can advance and when you should retreat. And this is obvious, this is a component of positioning, reading the direction the fight is going in. But like Bastion, moving is a commitment for him, right? Like, when Bastion's moving somewhere, Bastion's moving somewhere, right? Like, it's a whole step with a process behind it. So Bastion needs to be able to read a fight in advance of this so that he can start positioning in time. Because if he starts positioning too slowly, he's fucking dead. But if he positions too quickly, then he ends up doing nothing for a large period of time. So those are like the 2 main skills, and I will also include aim in there, even if it is a lower aim requirement than the only ones that require aim as far as some people are concerned. If you ask a lot of people who has an aim requirement, they will legitimately only answer with Widow and Ashe, maybe McCree. When in reality, multiple heroes have an aim requirement. Even Reinhardt's got an aim requirement. If you can't land a fire strike, you're not playing Reinhardt very well. Anyway. Yes, Bastion does require skill. Those are the skills he requires. There's no such thing as an autoplay hero. Despite what many people will say about Bastion and Winston and Symmetra. Next up. How do I develop my positioning, awareness, etc.? So positioning and awareness are very difficult skills to improve on, because it's very rarely is it obvious when something was a positioning mistake, because the difference between good positioning and bad positioning is usually extremely small. It's a difference of like a few feet frequently. So the thing you're trying to do, this is the main goal that you should be trying to work towards when you're doing your positioning, right? Which is that you're trying to maximize your damage output, or you're trying to maximize your threat, I should say, while minimizing your risk. So I have frequently give this example that I like to imagine circles around people, although I guess orbs would be more accurate since it's a three-dimensional game. But there's a circle that's around every character in the game, which is their zone of threat. And this is how I imagine it, as a literal circle around them. And the example I always like to give is Roadhog, because he has a very clearly designated zone of threat, and he's one of the few examples of a hero whose zone of threat changes depending on his abilities. So Roadhog's zone of threat is the length of his hook, which is 21 meters? I forget. There's like a weird number. It's either 19 or 21. I remember it being 1 off of 20, but I don't remember in which direction. But so that's the circle around him, is a 20 meter, for argument's sake, circle around him, because that's the length of his hook. And when his hook is on cooldown, that circle changes from 20 meters to basically point blank, because, well, point blank and like his right click range. So he's got like 2 circles. He's got the point blank circle around him, a dead zone, and then his right click's range as like a donut around him out there. And then when his hook comes back up again, his zone of threat extends back out to 20 meters after that. So if you're playing against Roadhog and you're playing someone like Soldier's zone of threat is his fall off range, which I don't know offhand. I think it's 25 meters. So his zone of threat is bigger than Roadhog's. So you're trying to put Roadhog in your circle while staying out of his circle. And that's basically all positioning comes down to at the end of the day. And then this thing obviously gets more difficult in practice because you have to worry about multiple people's circles simultaneously, and the geometry on the map can affect this because like 20 meters straight on from somebody is not equal to like 20 meters up. So, because high ground is better. So, you know, there's varying things in here, but this is on a very basic level. That's all positioning comes down to. Maximizing your threat while minimizing your risk, which means playing around all these circles. You can carry this train of thought with you, or this line of reasoning, into all other games, by the way. For example, in fighting games, positioning is also important, though they don't call it positioning, they call it footsies. Footsies is the exact same thing. Imagine we're playing, let's not imagine Fighterz, because Fighterz is fucking weird. So imagine we're playing Street Fighter. You're playing Dalsim, the noodly Indian boy, and I'm playing Zangief, big Russian muscle boy. Now, big noodle man Dalsim is a very long-range character. He's a zoner because he's standing all the way over there, and I'm like, Geef's all the way over there, Dalsim's all the way over there. But Dalsim can reach all the way over and give him a good slap with his noodle arm. Geef is big and strong, but Geef has to grab you. He's a grappler. So he has to get, his zone of threat is extremely small. It's basically just Geef and a little bit outside of Geef. Whereas Dalsim is like the whole screen. So Dalsim wants to keep Geef all the way over there. And Geef is big and slow. He has to go walk all the way over to the other side of the screen to get his hands on this damn noodle boy. So, you know, and that's an extreme example because this is a zoner versus a grappler. Is very, very skewed one way or the other. But, like, the principle applies to fighting games equally. MOBAs also. It's actually simpler in MOBAs, really, because those purely flat game. You don't have to worry about, like, any upper directions. It circles around people that are the range of their abilities. Or just like if it's like somebody that doesn't have many abilities, it's like the range of their auto attacks. So you can carry this train of thought with you into all games. All games at their base level are putting them in your circle while avoiding their circle. And awareness, I mean, it's all basically just experience. Like, awareness is so many things. It's such a broad category that you can include virtually anything in it. So I basically just have to say experience because there's so many elements that go into it. Because, I mean, positioning requires awareness because you have to be thinking about all these things, right? Awareness is things like ult tracking, positioning, ability usage, teamwork, synergy with your teammates. Hero picking could be categorized as awareness. Like, it can be so many things all at the same time. And you basically just need to, like, get used to all these things. And it gets easier as time goes by. It's very cumbersome to imagine circles around people all the time, right? But like, as you get more used to the game, it becomes way easier to do that. You don't even really need to consciously think about it anymore. It just becomes sort of habit, right? This is why fighting games, even though it's all about circles at the end of the day, fighting games are very hard to play, so it's kind of difficult to get used to. Especially if you play a game like Fighterz. Let me tell you, the circles you're imagining around people in Fighterz are some really fucking weird shapes. They're not circles anymore, in fact. Like, it gets easier as you get more used to the game. You start having to think less consciously about things, right? Because you're like, alright, Roadhog's got his hook up, I gotta be careful. You're thinking about it. Alright, his hook's on cooldown now, that means I can play more aggressive for an X amount of time. Eventually, you just get used to it. You don't even really think about it anymore. You're just like force of habit staying away from the Roadhog, and then you see him use his hook, and you, without thinking about it, just go more aggressively as a result, because you know you don't need to worry about it anymore. Positioning, awareness, all of these things. Basically, game sense, whatever you want to include in these categories. Basically, just at the end of the day, you just need to be really conscious and cognizant of what you're doing at any point in time. And this will be extremely cumbersome, and this will be extremely tedious to be thinking about this constantly. This is why positioning is so hard to improve. It's something you're doing constantly. The difference between success and failure is a very narrow margin. And to improve at it, you need to be thinking about some really boring shit for a while until it just becomes muscle memory. Because you need to constantly say to yourself things like, am I near cover? What cooldowns do I need to be playing around right now? What cooldowns do I have up right now that can protect me? What's their team composition? What do I need to be afraid of right now? Can my team support me right now? Where is my team? Do I need to be closer to them so they can support me? You need to be thinking about all of these things if you're going to do positioning really well. And this is really tedious. As you get better at it and you get used to doing it, you don't need to mentally think about these things anymore. They just become muscle memory. This is why fighting games are hard to get good at. You need to be worrying about multiple different things at once, but it's all happening very quickly, right? When you're trying to learn how to play a fighting game, to begin with, you think it's all about the combos and the big damage. When the better you get at a fighting game, what you actually start to learn is you're actually playing a game of chess extremely quickly. And that's the thing. But as you get better at it, you don't need to consciously think about so many of these elements anymore. They just become background noise because your brain, you got so much RAM in your head, right? And the more you're actively dedicating to these things, the more that slows you down. But eventually you get better and better at these things, and you don't really need to dedicate that much RAM to it anymore, because it just becomes a background process, which means you can then spend more of your time worrying about the important things. This is why fighting games get more fun the better you get at them. Because the tedious thing is keeping track of all the things you need to be worrying about. The interesting part of fighting games is the mix-ups and the reads. The thing is, you don't get to engage with that element of the game until you achieve a certain level of skill, because you need all of these tedious things to become background processes, because they can't be taking up so much of your headspace. And Overwatch is the same way, where all this positioning shit is really tedious, right? You don't want to be thinking about all these things consciously. You don't want to be like, am I near cover? Is his hookup? You don't want to be thinking about all these things. But after you've thought about these things enough, you don't consciously think about it anymore. It's a background process. So you can now dedicate yourself to the more interesting parts of the game, which is clicking on heads in big plays. So there you go. That's how you develop these skills. You've just got to be really cognizant of what you're doing. And yeah, it sucks, but it gets easier as time goes by. And then, next up, and this is the last question for this week, is there any point in even trying as a new player? This was essentially just a new person coming into the game saying, like, everybody already knows so much of the game, I'm just getting bodied, how do you even improve? You know, this is a common problem people have where they feel they're joining a game too late. Everybody already knows how to play the game. There's nobody for them to, like, get better alongside. They're just gonna get bodied constantly. And this is a problem people have about fighting games all the time. You'll hear this all the time. Oh, that game, they've solved for that game. It's way too late to get into that now. I should have gotten into it earlier. The thing is, you know, there's a saying I like, which is that the best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago. And the second best time to plant a tree is right now. If you want to do it, you want to do it. You know, if you want to play the game, you want to play the game. It doesn't matter if it's old, strictly speaking. Like, sure, you're not going to be you're not going to be learning with as many people anymore. This is why people, if somebody wants to play a fighting game, it's generally recommended you play a new fighting game. Because you're playing with the largest number of people at launch, which means you can improve alongside all of these people. You're not just playing against people who have been playing the game for years. In practice, you're still playing against people that have played the game for years, because a lot of knowledge between fighting games carries over. If I started playing Street Fighter right now, I'm not starting at zero, because I've already spent years playing a different fighting game. Even if it's a different type of fighting game, Fighterz is very different to Street Fighter. I've already gone through the base process there. So in practice, this doesn't actually work. You're still, even if it's a new game, you're not actually playing with solely new people. Suppose Overwatch 2 comes out tomorrow, right? You're not playing with many new people, partly because it's calling it Overwatch 2 is extraordinarily generous. But you're playing against people who have already played first-person shooters before, right? That's the thing. And people who have already played MOBAs before, there's a little bit of carryover between these two things, because ability management is a big thing in Overwatch, and you will practice this more in fighting games than you will in first-person, or not in fighting, in MOBAs than you will in first-person shooters. And then first-person shooters, obviously, there's the obvious carryover of it being another first-person shooter. So even if it's a new game, you're not actually learning with completely new people when the game first comes out, because there's carryover from other games. But whatever, this is a pointless distinction to be making. At the end of the day, here's the only thing that should matter on if you're trying to get into a game, right? This is the only thing you should worry about if you're asking yourself, should I play this game? And the answer is, do you want to play the fucking video game? People are so fucking weird about video games, dude. If you like the video game, if you enjoy the concept of the video game, and you want to be good at the video game, play the video game, you know? And if you start playing the video game, and it turns out you don't like it, then you don't have to keep playing it. It's okay. You know, you can think you're gonna like something, and then it ends up you don't like it for a bunch of reasons. for example, fighting games again. I've tried to play several fighting games before, but I've not been able to get into it because there hasn't been something that hooks me. There needs to be something that hooks me in the video game. And this could be any number of things. It could be the aesthetic of the video game, it could be the gameplay, it could be a character in the game. There needs to be like one of or more of these things for me to bring me into the game, right? So like, I tried to play Street Fighter, I tried to play Blaze Blue. I think I tried to play a Guilty Gear game back like 1,000 years ago. The problem is that I've never played a fighting game before. And I'm trying to play these games, and nothing hooks me in immediately. I'm just getting bodied. The closest I ever got was Street Fighter V, because I liked Ed a lot, which is like Bastion, so he's a boxer. I like him aesthetically speaking, and I liked his gameplay. But Street Fighter itself still didn't do it for me, right? So I eventually fell off despite dedicating a fair bit of time to it. But Fighterz did hook me in because it has a great aesthetic. I like the gameplay, and I like multiple characters. So it's got all the components for me, so that's the fighting game that eventually stuck. Because I really like Android 21, I really like her gameplay, I like the aesthetic, I like Dragon Ball. I've watched Dragon Ball for as long as I can remember. Like, one of my earliest memories is watching Dragon Ball when I was like 5. Anyway. So, it's the game that eventually got me in, because it had multiple hooks that got me in there, you know? So, like, this, if you play Overwatch, you know, you're gonna need something that hooks you in. This is why some people only play one character. It's legitimately the only character that has the hook for them. And that's fine, people play different video games for different reasons. But, like, that's the only question you should be asking yourself. Is there any point in even trying as a new player? Do you like the game, and are you having fun? You know, that's it. That should be the only thing you're really worrying about, because it's a video game. If you're not enjoying it, you don't care about the personal growth, right? Like, for me, personal growth in a video game is a big thing. I like the hard video games. I like MOBAs. I like fighting games. I like spectacle fighters like Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, because the personal mastery inherent in these games is a big draw for me. I'm a big fan of, like, looking back at all of the progress I've made. That's very gratifying for me. But the game I still have to like the game, you know? Like, the game still has to be fun, or that part doesn't matter. So really all you should be asking is, do you like the game and are you having fun? And if the answer is yes, then play the game, even if you're a new player. So there you go. Thank you very much for watching if you did. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. More than happy to answer. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, submit it however you want. A comment, Discord, email, smoke signals, anything you want, brother. I start streaming on Twitch Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, 8 p.m. EST to 11 EST. It doesn't show in the description. If you managed to make it all the way through the video and so I still enjoyed it, please like the video and subscribe for more content of middling quality in the future. And I hope you found the video helpful.